This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Peramang people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
I just do it for the love of the story, and I do it for the love of the people who are behind those stories. We have such great history and tradition here in South Australia. People on the land, we do all that, and for me, they're the salt of the earth, and they're what I love writing about.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Tony Love has a way with words. He is a South Australian-based professional wine reviewer, writer, and editorial content creator. A true career journalist and lover of all things vine and wine. Hi, Tony. Thanks for joining me.
Hi there, Shanteh. Thanks for having me. That's a real pleasure.
Oh, it's lovely to have you. I always enjoy our chats. Tony, I'm going to ask you a random question. Tell me what's the most common one-liner you get about your last name?
Okay. I basically get lots of weird stuff on my phone from people from all over the world, with wanting to know who I am or if my name's real, actually, more than anything. And of course, it is. It's a real name. It's my dad's name. It comes from the West Country in England.
Amazing. Well, it's a wonderful name to have. But I did, being pretty cookie cutter, I did feel myself today wandering around the house going, I've got my podcast with the Love Machine. And then I was like, stop it. What is wrong with you? Why are you saying that?
I do get lots of nicknames. They range from Dr. Love, of course. I've had Love Dog. It goes on and on. But Tilo I get occasionally from certain demographic, which I kind of love in a kooky kind of way. But I'm used to it. I've had it all my life, so, it doesn't worry me anymore.
Well, it's a wonderful association to have. Tony, tell me about if you have a first memory in wine.
Well, I kind of do in a way, but it sort of goes way back. I mean, my memory in wine is from my childhood, probably around the sort of age of 10 or 11 or 12, or probably around that age. I lived in a war service home, working class suburb in Wollongong. My dad worked at the steelworks, and my mum was a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany. And we had wine in our house, and we were probably the only house I knew of friends and everything at that age where wine was a thing. And so I kind of had this memory of, and we came to South Australia. My father's brother lived in South Australia, and I remember going to Chateau Yaldara when I was probably about 10, and for me it was like a Disneyland kind of thing. It was a huge kind of old-fashioned German chateau kind of thing. And I remember Dad then was buying pink sect and German sect for our, for quote-unquote champagne in our household, and probably we probably had some Shiraz or other things as well. So that's my first memory in terms of way back. But then the next thing I remember is I was about 20 years old. I was on a gap year from university, travelling across Australia I was studying in Canberra, journalism and politics, etc. And I was travelling across and staying in South Australia and working a bit, and I had a day off, and I went down to McLaren Vale, and I remember going into a big shed that was the only place that was open early in the morning, and it was Ingleby's Wine in McLaren Flat. And way at the end, I poked my head through the door, through the big kind of sliding door, and there were two blokes down the end of this shed, and they were tasting wine, and they kind of saw myself and my friend, and they said, "Come in, fellas." And we went down to the end of this shed, and they showed us some wine and tasted us some wine with us, and I was smitten at that moment. I was like, I like this. This is my world. So so that was they're my two pinpoint kind of sort of memories of wine early on in my life.
The time where it's kind of just in the background, and then the time where it kind of reaches in and grabs you. It's pretty cool that you had that experience where someone, just opens the door and says, "What are you doing? Do you want to come taste some wine?" I love that that sense of involvement. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and it was, and I know, and I still see the fella to this day. His name's Walter Clappus. He's the winemaker, or the patriarch at the Hedonist Wines in McLaren Vale. And I only saw him literally a couple of weeks ago, and we always have a laugh about that moment, because I always blame him for for my love of wine and for my life in wine. And I say, it's your fault, Walter.
Well, I'll shout out to Walter, because we're all very thankful that that moment happened.
Yes, and to Walter. Good on you, Walter. That's right.
Now, tell me about how your career in writing began. Is that, you said you studied journalism? Was that at university?
Yes, well, in those days it was Canberra College of Advanced Education, and it was one of only a couple of university of tertiary courses in journalism. And so it was called journalism. You had a sort of journalism and creative writing course there. It's now Canberra University, and that's where I studied. I had this kind of dream. Must have been a dream at some stage, or rather, I must have seen a Four Corners show or something or other when I was 16 or 17, and thought, that's what I want to do. I want to change the world. I want to be one of those foreign correspondents. And so I studied there, and my life didn't go down the foreign correspondent route. It kind of led me in other directions when jobs became available. And I worked in Sydney for 10 years or so in the magazine and book industry, in sort of outdoors adventure kind of magazines like Overlander and Australian Outdoors. And I was a feature writer. Overlander was like a four-wheel drive magazine, but I wasn't the four-wheel drive person. I was writing features and all around Australia. I was in the days where you could go off for 2 or 3 weeks and write amazing, long-form articles, feature articles about life in the Channel Country in Queensland, or the Kimberleys, or whatever it might have been. And so I learnt practiced my chops there in those long-form articles. And I spent 10 years in Sydney doing that. Then we had our first daughter, and we had our first daughter in '88 in Sydney, and my wife's from Marina is from Adelaide, and we decided to come back to her place to have parental things going on with her and the children and everything. So we moved to Adelaide, and I got a job at the Adelaide Advertiser, and was there as features editor. And I was there for close to 30 years and left in 2018. So I kind of just followed. It was one of those things where jobs come up, you take an opportunity, and that leads you down a path. And eventually, I was the features editor in charge of about 30 journos and artists and designers and sub-editors, and then moved into column writing, and then I was graphics editor at the paper, and then I became arts editor for a festival when there was some controversy going on. And then at one stage, the editor then came up to me and said, "Tony, look, we've got a few changes in the food and wine section, and we want to sort of focus on that a bit." And he knew that I was making some wine as a bit of an amateur thing with a few mates. And he said, "You know how to do this stuff, don't you?" And he said, "And your wife works at Petaluma, your winery and restaurant, and sell it all. You know all this stuff. You can do that." So and that's how I got the job as, taste editor, food and wine editor section for several years. And, that mutated into restaurant reviewing and then eventually wine writing.
Holy moly. I mean, I knew you had an extensive career, but it is so layered with so many components. And I mean, I think that is why, your writing is has so much breadth to it because you've had such experience writing for different demographics and, like you said, of all the great outdoors, and that's, you know, essentially wine is not just about stuff in a bottle, it's about agriculture and so much. So, but I do want to segue for 1 second, and then I'm going to come back to talking about working for taste. But Marina is one of the most vivacious, wonderful humans in the world. Can you tell me what it was like when you first met her?
Someone been telling you secrets. Well, we met in 82. So we've known each other now. We've been with each other for 40 years. So that's pretty amazing. And yes, and she's exceptionally vivacious. And I consider myself to be incredibly lucky to have lived my life with her. She was working as a young actress. She was working in computers, the very early stages of computers. And we met at a midnight oil concert. There you go. And very Australian. And and really haven't been apart since. So, and she's worked in the wine industry. When we moved to Adelaide, she basically got a job at Petaluma, and then as that's gone through all sorts of, and since then in all sorts of different spots within the wine industry. And worked for Steve Pannell for a while, worked for the South Australian Wine Industry Association. The last 5 years or so, she's been marketing manager at Langhorne Creek region, and has had a gap year in the last year, and is just starting to get back into a few things at the moment, you know. So, very lucky to have lived my life with her.
If anyone is yet to meet Marina, she has a smile that will just absolutely knock your socks off, and just one of the warmest faces I've ever known, and just a lovely human. So the two of you.
Pass that on.
So tell me, now you're moving into, like you said, working for Taste. Talk to me a little bit about what role kind of food played in your kind of life up until that point.
Well, it goes back to the very first question about, my first memory of wine. I lived in a house where my mother was a fairly traditional European cook, but mutating that into Australian cooking as well in the 60s and so, and my memories were there, and we just had good, fresh, rich, classic food. My dad grew a vegetable garden, and so I was. We had good food in our house and good hearty food. I remember we had cooked breakfast every day. Dad worked at the steelworks, and there were every day was a certain day of breakfast. Sausages, lamb's fry, bacon and eggs one day a week. It was almost a set diary, and so food was just part of how I lived. It was just a natural part of my life, and I guess it's never been away from that. And we travelled overseas and love eating street food in Asia, love eating great kind of classic foods in Italy and France. So it's just been part of how we live, and I don't kind of think it as anything kind of something. I don't think it as a focus or a thing that we do. It's just part of how I breathe and live. So that's how it is.
Well, you've had such an experience in terms of yourself, cooking food. Obviously, you're growing up around people that food was important to them, but then also restaurant reviewing and writing about it. Did you ever get to a point where you felt that you were exhausted by that, or going to restaurants and reviewing? Did you ever get to a point where you thought, I don't want to do this anymore?
Not really. I mean, it might probably be now, as I sort of look back on all that. But I've got a kind of a sort of mindset where every day is a new day, and when I go to a restaurant, if I was going to a restaurant review, I just wanted it to be the best. I didn't go with a set mindset of what it wanted to be. I wanted to go and do what it promised me it would do through its either its press release or its hype or its people reviews I'd read or the word of mouth on the street sort of thing. I just was always looking forward to having a good time and having the food tell me kind of what that restaurant was about and what the people behind that restaurant believed in, and I always went with that mindset, and in a vast majority of the times, that was sort of responded to, and I had a good time with it. I suppose when you're doing top 100 kind of things, and you're sort of reviewing 3 restaurants a week to get to a deadline or something or other, it does become a chore sometimes. But you have to kind of, as a professional, you have to kind of go, nope, that's not a chore. This is this person, this restaurant, these chefs, these owners, they need as much fair go and as much kind of focus and concentration as I gave the last one and I gave the first one. And I've always had that attitude, and I maintain it to this day when I'm tasting wine. It's always that. I mean, and very difficult. When I was doing Halliday for a season a couple of years ago, and I had 1,500 wines to do in a few months, and it was just like, nope. Every wine, even at the end when it was becoming a real hard task, I had to concentrate and go, no, this one deserves just as much attention as the very first one. So it's a professional attitude, I guess.
Yeah, it's very professional, and I commend you for it. But you're right, when you do get down to the crux sometimes, my partner will say to me, you need to do more, you've got to get through a few more wines. I'm like, no, I'm spent. I'm tired. That wine deserves more attention than that. And I've got nothing left. So I need to take a break, and then I'll get back to it. So I know what you mean. But it is a great outlook to have. And especially I think as well with restaurant reviewing, every great restaurant reviewer I've ever spoken to had that mindset of, they just being on their side and wanting them to win, and not going in and wanting to pull something up to pieces. They're kind of championing them and going, yep, I want you to, achieve everything that you've set out to do. So I really love to hear that. That's a wonderful aspect.
I think it's really important to do that. I think it's just like, and also I always have, when I'm in a restaurant, it's not about me, it's about them, and I spend a lot of time looking at other people in the restaurant and how they're experiencing the thing as well, and how they're being treated, because sometimes you get recognized and you kind of go, okay, well I've been sprung, I just have to kind of see how this goes. But then I spend a lot of time at other looking around other tables and seeing how they're being treated, and that's really important for me as well.
When you talk about writing, you've written, like you said, some long feature articles. You've written, I'm sure, 20 words on a tasting note for wine. What gives you the most joy in writing in your life today?
Good one. I mean, I guess it's like, whether it's a 20-word or 1,000-word or 2,000 words, for me, it's what gives me the joy is finding the right phrase, is writing. I don't sit down with sort of a game plan line by line of what I got to achieve. I take my notes, I do my transcriptions of interviews, and then I start. And the joy for me, the number one joy, the first joy, put it that way, is finding that lead paragraph, the first couple of paragraphs. What am I going to say that attracts somebody's attention, not in a clickbait kind of way, but something that focuses in on the story that I've got ahead of me, and I've got all the notes and all the information, and I go, how do I tell this story in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs that then somebody will go, I love what this is about, I'm going to stay with this and read it. That's my number one joy. And then from then I kind of, I just move through my notes, and I find it a very free form kind of writing. I've always done that. I mean, in terms of feature writing, I've always allowed the story to lead me rather than me the other way. And that's my kind of mindset and my practice. When you're writing news stories for newspapers and things, then there's a bit more kind of, set discipline on what you have to do. But even then, the lead, the angle, the crux of it is, what is the crux of the story? And that's the joy of it for me, and remains so.
How interesting. What do you read? Do you read a lot yourself, or do you find that, writing all day and being in front of a computer, you like to do something else when you kind of switch off? Or is there something that you particularly, like fiction or non-fiction, that you particularly like to read?
If I could take a photo and show you of my bedside table, it would be like it's like a kind of a high-rise, building of books. I'm an avid reader. I probably read. I love reading politics and history. Occasional. I'm not a huge crime fiction kind of person. I do occasionally, but I love nonfiction, and I love, I suppose, historical fiction in a sense that's based on true stories that has been then fictionalized, and that's probably my genre, and do a lot of that. Professionally, I read most of the wine magazines and blogs and things that come, that are out there. I mean, I read a lot of that. I read the weekend newspaper, feature newspapers. So, yep, we've got a household full of books and other things. So, and that's, for me, that is an incredibly important part of my practice and my it's a joy, and it's also a professional thing. Is that I think you have to read, you have to see how other people are expressing themselves. It's all about ideas, and there are a gazillion ideas out there in books, and I love coming across all that sort of thing. I mean, we're literally about to kind of, in the next hour or so, head into Writers' Week at Adelaide Festival and spend an afternoon in Writers' Week. So, again, that's all week. That's till Thursday, and we'll be on and off down there listening to other writers talk about their practice and their ideas and their thinking processes and everything. And it's one of my great joys in life, and Marina's as well. So we read very different things. I guess that's probably why the house is full of books, because we've got two lots of people with two different genres and loves, and we've made a promise to ourselves this year that we will start cleaning our bookcases up and parting with ones that we haven't read for a long time, or we don't think we'll read again, which will bring me great sadness as I see them leave the house and go to the local book shed. But one has to do what one has to do sometimes.
Oh, I can't imagine. I've recently done something similar because I hold on to them, and I think, I thought maybe I want to read this book to my child, and I just kept holding on. And books are heavy, and when you move house, you're like, my God, the amount of books, and so I've got rid of a lot later and thought, I'll have to just buy them again if I want them again. But some of them, you've read and reread 1,000 times, and it's like letting go of a little baby. It's hard.
It's letting go of a baby, but there is a thing called the library, and we belong to the local library, to the South Australian library system, and that helps us out as well if we want to. And there's a lot of cookbooks that come into the house through the library system, and as well, and that's something that's a pleasure for both of us to look through and garner ideas, and a lot of that's from Middle Eastern kind of genre, I guess, as well, a Scandinavian Middle Eastern sort of genre of cookbooks and things. So, yep. And, yep. So it's all there. It just keeps on coming. Ideas.
You've just blown my mind by bringing up a library. I'm like, oh, yeah, libraries. I mean, the last time I was in a library, I was using it to study for some wine exam, just was the place to be quiet. But I've forgotten that there's a whole institution of being able to rent a book and take it back. That's outrageous. and outrageous and totally brilliant, and such a wonderful thing for our society to be able to do. And I love going into libraries. I love going into bookshops. These are my happy places. Blokes love doing things like hardware stores and that sort of thing. And I'm a huge fan of them, but I'm also a huge fan of bookshops and stationery stores. Must be something in my world of publishing and writing that has those things. There's something about a journal. I've been a avid journaler my whole life, so there's something about a brand new journal and a nice pen that is just, I totally get it. I froth over a little bit too. But I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on something like Audible, where books are read aloud by actors and other people? Do you find that is just a complete sin? I don't find it a sin at all. Not something I do. We have done in the past on long road trips, across the country, where we've in days when cars had cassette players or CD players, and I'm sure now we could do, of course, that we could do it streaming. So we have had that in the past, but I find it distracting in a way, and I need to concentrate
on what I'm reading 100%. Nothing else. I can't read with other sounds around me or other distractions like, driving or, other things. So for me, I get it. And I know lots and lots of people love it. I can only do English voices. I apologise to the American people who may be listening. I can't. I just don't gel with the American accent in reading some of those things. But I love the English accent and variations on the English accent. But yeah, I'm now really 100% reader in printed form rather than audible.
Yeah, I definitely can get on board with anything Stephen Fry does, I have to say. I'm a big Audible listener, and I realise it is kind of lazy, but I find that I am able to ingest and digest a lot more content by listening in my day-to-day life. I don't find I have a lot of time to sit down with a book, and I do it, before bed often, but it's only usually, like 20 minutes. So, I consume a lot of Audible, and being read a book is one thing, but being read and told a story really well is quite another. So, but I want to talk about how has the social media world affected journalism and affected kind of the world in which you live?
Well, it's had a huge impact. I mean, the digital space and digital journalism and social media has just really changed very, very quickly the world that I was brought up in terms of journalism and newspapers and magazines and stuff. Fortunately, books, there was this belief that books would be suffering as well, but I don't think that has happened. I think people understand that readers are readers, and so I think that's a great thing, and people love reading and love, as you say, good storytelling. So social media is another aspect altogether. I get it, and I am part of it as part of my work practice. I'm not an avid I'm not a blogger on a regular thing, and I don't do selfies or anything like that. For me, I believe that social media should still be a platform to tell a story, whether it's with a visual component as well as a caption or a mini story component. And there's an art in doing that. So I have no problem with it. I'm not a kind of an old man and shaking his fist at the cloud going, how dare you ruin the world sort of thing. But there are lots of pitfalls and lots of challenges to make it work well. And I look at it every day across Instagram and a little bit of Facebook, but mostly Insta. The wine business works mostly through the Insta platform, and so I do look at that, and I do rue the fact that newspapers, or people have changed their practice. People don't read newspapers anymore, and that may be because of a faster pace in the world. It may be because newspapers have lost their way and trying to respond to clickbaiting more and more, or whatever it might be. This is a discussion that could go on in Writers' Week for 5 hours and never come to a conclusion. But I get it, and I like to see people using it really well. And you see a lot of people not using it well in terms of messaging, certainly in the wine business that I look at. So I keep an eye on it, and I am part of it, and I want it to kind of work, and I want it for people to understand how it works, and I want kids and teenagers and to understand how to use it properly and not be a victim of it, and not be not be caught up in it, so that it's all that exists. And I do fear as an old school kind of journo and writer that is happening more and more, that there's just people on their phones with their eyes glued to their screen and scrolling and whatever. And I get all that. I don't have a problem with it at all. But I would just want people to understand it better.
Yeah, there's so much power in there, isn't it? And that can just be used for great things and really can go the other way too. So, I often see people kind of, whatever it may be, consuming, TikTok, whatever it may, 5 seconds of a snapshot of something. And I think, God, if you use that time to read a well-published article you'd have that little arsenal or that little bit of knowledge from that. Whereas what do you have from just scrolling for half an hour on TikTok? You've just got this massive amount of information of bits and pieces, and you don't know the caliber of who these people are or what, you know, background they have behind them and what qualifications. And it is very scary, I think. And I don't know how, to navigate it myself sometimes either. So for me, I think it's better to kind of get your source of information from lots of different various avenues, and then maybe, you know, you come across something worthwhile.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a really interesting point there about the 5-second thing. You know, it's like, I mean, what are you going to get in 5 seconds? You're going to get a headline. You're going to get a fast, you know, single opinion or whatever it might be. And it's not the story. It's not the full picture. And, you know, that then leads to all the kind of, you know, troubles that we've seen through the American election period and all that sort of stuff. You just get, you know, sort of blah, you get kind of, you know, and you just aren't able to make, you know, a well-formed sort of opinion or well-formed information from that kind of, you know, sort of news gathering or news intake and information intake. And yes, you're right. I mean, and I'm sure you know, this is being taught now in schools is about understanding, you know, social media, understanding sort of the vast amount of information that comes into people now and how to read that and how to analyse that. And, you know, and now we have, of course, the rise of AI very quickly and you know, chat GTP, et cetera, and that's a whole new level of what people need to understand and be able to analyse. So, you know, it's and for me, part of that is really exciting and part of it's scary. So, you know, I that's the way it is.
Yeah. It's forging ahead, whether we like it or not. And you're right. I'm in two minds. I'm exactly with you there. Tony, what advice would you give to young writers that are up and coming now?
Well, I mean, I do a bit of mentoring as well through my, you know, through sort of official kind of, you know, formats as well as informal through friends of children and other things. And look, I think it's about, well, much of what we've spoken about already today. You know, it's about reading. It's about you know, understanding how ideas think. You know, being there ready to. I sort of say to people, you know, you've got a good story starts in the brain. You know, it's a mindset. It's like, what is the story? Figure out for yourself what the story is, and then work out how to tell it in your own unique way. I think, you know, sort of that individual uniqueness in a writer's form, in a writer's language, is incredibly important. And so I do encourage people to kind of, you know, write, practice, read. You know, it is not something that's going to come instantaneously. You know, I mean, I've been doing what I've been doing for 45 years plus, and I approach every day as though it's a new day and it's my first story in a way. And I think that's, you know, the expectation through, you know, blogging and all that sort of thing. Well, you know, that's one form, but it's not the only form. And that instantaneous kind of expectation these days that, you know, you're going to be a hero in the first time round. Well, that isn't the case in any form. So I just say to people, just work, write, get up every day, you know, sort of, or, you know, when you're working and just write, and you'll get better at every time you write a new sentence. And that's the same with me still after 45 years. I still believe that, it's all about the practice.
If you were to think, I mean, big question, but if you were to think about your career over all of that time, is there a certain publication or is there something that you're most proud of?
Interesting. Well, I guess there was. I mean, I'm kind of pretty happy with where I am now in terms of the writing I'm doing within Daily and SA Life, Solstice Media in South Australia. The brief has always been just write great stories about South Australian wine or, you know, culture of wine, etc. And I love that, and I love doing that. I did work for several years in Sydney with Time Life books in department as an editor, the Australian editor, and of a series of books, Australians at War, and I really was proud of that whole series that we did. That was around the late 80s. Late 80s during the bicentennial sort of period. It was a project then, and that was like a series of the classic Time Life books that, again, is about writing history for mass readership, and that's a real love of mine, is to be able to sort of write those kind of great stories of our war period, and that was like way back from colonial wars right through to Vietnam and Afghanistan, and it wasn't Afghanistan by then. And so that was a really proud moment of mine. But the stories that have been published and that were good long-form stories that spent a lot of time working on, including lots of research. Everyone, I love all of them. I treat them all with great respect when I read back at them. And quite often I kind of read them back and go, yeah, that's not that's well said, well written. I'm happy with that. Whoever wrote this did a good job. And if I feel like that, then I feel like I'm happy with that.
I think what I love about you is that you're so well respected, and I think that after being in the industry for so long, having to put so much down on paper, covering controversial things and everything, you're just very well respected all throughout Australia as a writer, and you represent South Australia so particularly well because you're so ingrained in all of the aspects of life and you really champion them, and I think that that's something to be really, really proud of.
Oh, thank you, Shanteh. That's really kind words for you to say that, and I feel really closely connected here. And if you're going to be doing what I do as a freelance writer, I've niched myself in South Australia, and if there's one state you can do it, I reckon it's South Australia, because there's so much here and all the great institutions, like the AWRI. Wine Research Institute and Wine Australia and all the great regions around me. I mean, I can do it here, and I love doing that. And I mean, I don't do this for respect. I don't, I appreciate what you say, and I really, I really love the kind words, but I just do it for the love of the story, and I do it for the love of the people who are behind those stories. We have such great history and tradition here in South Australia, as well as a great, sort of forward thinking and new generations, and all those things are people. It's all about people, and as you said, earlier on, agriculture, people on the land. We do all that, and for me, they're the salt of the earth, and they're what I love writing about.
I agree with you. Definitely, it's a joyful place to be, to represent people and this amazing country that we live in. Tony, tell me about 3 beverages that you'd drink for the rest of your life if you could only have 3.
3, right? Can I have more than 3? No, I won't. I would 3 beverages. Well, I suppose it comes down to on a hot summer's day, it'll be a beer or a gin and tonic, and a Riesling, beautiful Riesling. That's 3, but then there's more than that. Come on, Chardonnay. I'll drink Chardonnay just about any day of the year, and I love Grenache, and I have loved Grenache long before it became a popular thing in the last few years. I love sand-oriented grown Grenache, like from Vine Vale in the Barossa and from Blewett Springs in McLaren Vale. They're 2 of my favourite things. And I love method traditional sparkling wine, and I say that rather than champagne because I live in the Adelaide Hills, and there are some amazing wines in the Adelaide Hills. So I love them as well. So there's way more than 3. I hate it when people say, "Can you just give me 3 things?" or "What are the things? What is the meal that you would eat on death row?" And I go, No, I can't answer that. You have to give me 10 things. So I can't limit myself.
Yeah, well, we like you said, we have so much at our fingertips, but it always gives you a little insight into kind of how you tick and your palate and what you love, which is why I do it. But Tony, it's been completely enlightening. I love what you do. Like I said, you're so well respected, and what an incredible career you've had so far. I could probably ask you a million questions, and I actually have a few more here, so we might have to do part 2 another time. But thank you for your time today. It's always a real pleasure to sit down and chat to you.
Thank you very much, Shanteh. It's been a real joy to have a chat to you, and I really appreciate your kind words and your questioning lines. It's been really friendly and really lovely to talk. So thanks a lot.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram @overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.